I'm a graveyard nerd. It's quiet there, and with beautiful landscaping. A great place to take reflective walks. One day it was very hot, and I wanted to sit down. The closest thing besides the ground was a crypt that sat alone in the fork of one of the paths. I very respectfully said, "Please, may I sit here and rest a while," as I climbed on top. Almost immediately I felt 2 knocks underneath me. I told myself it's my imagination. 2 more knocks. I say out loud, "I mean you, no disrespect. Knock twice more if you just want me to leave." It hesitated. Then 2 distinct hard knocks hit me right in the bum where I sat. I said, okay, I'm going." Well, another time I went near dark. I've walked through the children's section many times. I've seen the toys people have placed of the children's graves. Some of them look 50+ years old. This night I didn't just walk past them. I stopped and thanked them all for coming here and trying to fulfill their destiny in some way, and told them I'm sorry it was cut short. As soon as I said rest in peace, one of those old decrepit toys began to flash little lights and play music. My SO noped all the way to the car. I actually stayed and tried to talk, but nothing else happened. Last one. I went to a different graveyard this time. In an old Moravian graveyard with graves as far back as the 1500s, maybe earlier, but I couldn't read them all. This graveyard has huge hills with mausoleums tucked into the hills. I like to sit on top of one and look out over the whole place. Very serene. This day I sat up there and watched a fox spinning circles way down at the bottom of the hill. He acted confused like he had rabies. I wasn't going to move until he left, so I waited. A woman came from I didn't even know where BC. I could see the whole place. She walked towards a grave near where this fox was spinning around. I got worried for her and stood up to scream down to her that there was a rabid fox and to run away. But when I stood up, she wasn't there anymore. I waited for the fox to show itself again, but it was gone too. Just like that. Gone. I very cautiously climbed down, went down the hill to where I saw all this happen. No woman. No fox. Nothing but quiet graves and beautiful flowers. Story 2. I think I had encountered a ghost as a kid. Strange, I think I was 5 or 6 when this happened. I was sleeping beside my mother, and my dad was supposed to come back home from work that night late. My dad was supposed to come to somewhere around 1 to 2 a.m. Mind you, it was winter, hence it wasn't much windy and the windows were closed and OBV the fan wasn't on. I was a light sleeper as a kid, hence I understood what was happening when. My dad entered. He greeted me and asked me if I was pretending to be asleep. He said he'd brought my fab chocolates. I giggled and said yes, I am. Well, I think that what I did wrong. The next moment my mum came in the room saying the doorbell wasn't ringed by my dad. In fact, someone seemed to have ding-dong-ditched us in the middle of the night. I obviously didn't think much because I was a little kid, but I kept on wondering what I saw. Who asked me if I was asleep or not? I freaked out a minute after the above thought came to my mind, and I told my mother, who obviously thought I was joking. "Cucks, I was a kid." Well, then I think I fell asleep. But now. First governor. Scared. Father. My mother was fast asleep. I felt something touch my face, caress my face. I didn't dare to look up. But then I heard the sound of a hanger falling. It was hanging on out closet. I looked up and saw nothing. I looked at my mother and saw that she was fast asleep. Then the bell rang again. This time I peed my fucking self, and I sadly don't remember what happened next. But what do y'all think happened? Was I just too imaginative? Who bribed me with chocolated in the middle of G night? How did the hanger fall even when there was literally zero ventilation in the room? I think something is haunting my home. Strange. A few weeks ago, my dad left home to go to work in Mindanao. I was excited since he was going to bring gifts such as food and toys. A week or 2 later, perhaps in the afternoon, I heard a familiar voice. It was my dad, and my mom was talking to him. I sighed and focused on my iPad. A few minutes later, my dad knocked on the door. When I opened it, I saw him. He wore a gray shirt. Why am I mentioning this? This is important later. Me and Dad hugged each other and talked for a bit. I don't remember much about the conversation, but I remember him saying, "Tomorrow, I'll show you something." He was acting really weird. but he's a weird guy, so I didn't mind it. After that, I went to sleep. A few hours later, I woke up in the middle of the night. I was a bit dizzy, so I went to get a glass of water. When I checked my parents' room, I saw that only my mom is there. I asked, "Ma, where's Dad? Did he leave?" "What? Your dad is still in Davao," Mom replied. I was fucking flabbergasted. If Dad was still in Davao, then who the fuck did I hug? I explained to my mom about what happened and that I literally heard her talking to my dad. But she denied it. The next morning, I talked to my mom about going to the mall. Mom was feeling unwell, so she said that Dad can let me go to SMA when he comes back. That's when the memory of what happened last night flooded back. I told her what happened again, and she was as shocked as me. Then she called my dad, explaining what I told him. I started freaking out when he said he was wearing a gray shirt the day before. A few weeks later, and I somewhat forgot about the experience, my mom walked up to me and asked if I went to their bedroom and opened the closet. I said no, and she said that she saw someone opening the closet. She didn't mind it since she thought it was me, and obviously it wasn't. I stayed up all night so my friend who was living with me didn't leave the room. I didn't leave either since I was too busy watching TikTok. Dad thinks someone is haunting this area. I don't think the house is haunted since no one died in this house. Plus my dad built it. My theory is that an encanto is toying with us. Encantos are deities or nature spirits that Filipinos used to worship and respect during the pre-colonial times. Although this theory could be easily disproven, perhaps a gust of wind could have opened the closet. The only question I have is, who the fuck did I hug a few weeks ago? If it's not my father, then who is it? Black magic see here found at home while cleaning. This happened about 20 years ago. My mom and grandma told me this story. My mom was pregnant with one of my elder sisters, or maybe just got birth to one of them. Doesn't really matter, but she was very weak at that time and could barely do stuff on her own. Basically, she called her mom, so my grandma, to help her clean their flat. Dad was typically working all day, so my grandma got to work and started cleaning the flat of my parents, even though she was mentally very stressed herself. Recently, her two other kids in teenage years, so my uncle and aunt, had been fighting like never before, raising hands on each other and all that. But it was really, really bad. One even bruised the other really bad till they threw up. So at that time, home was really chaos for my grandma. Obviously, my grandpa was also working all day. Every day. My grandma is an extreme perfectionist when it comes to cleaning, so she really cleans every bit of the home. She comes to an end when she wanted to brush off dust from the wall clock in the living room. As she removes the clock from the wall, a tiny, tiny sphere of aluminum foil falls from the backside of the clock. She was surprised by it and thought it strange, but just threw it away. She returned to cleaning, but couldn't stop thinking about what that was and why was it up there. She got curious and took it out the bin, and she threw it back again. It went like this for a few times, but she eventually picked it out again and decided to open the aluminum foil sphere. She found all kind of stuff there, all fitting into this tiny sphere. Nails, human nails, hair, some writings on some type of skin, leather, in Arabic I think, and even quicksilver. As she opened it, the quicksilver shattered and spread all over the table. She says there was nearly no way to collect it all again, but she still somehow managed to collect it. She was shocked and knew in what direction that was going. But who put that up there? And why? And what should she do with it? She called her mom to ask what to do with it. She had told her to flush it down the toilet. Apparently it's better to burn it, though. Time goes by and my grandma notices that my uncle and aunt aren't having these outrageous fights anymore. Yeah, siblings fighting is normal, but she thinks that this event is somehow linked to the little sphere she found. But who did it? So time went by and one day a relative from my dad's side somehow, don't know how it came to that, confesses that they did that. They put that piece of black magic up there. Apparently it should have kept the family of the person who did this together, but in turn sacrificed the peace of another household. I think the quicksilver packed into this little sphere symbolized the forced family bond of the person that put that behind the clock. Black magic, see her, is really a scary topic, especially because it can most likely only come from people close to you. And if any LFU plans to do something like this, please don't. Even if you use it for something good for yourself, you'll sacrifice another happiness for yours. Stay away from it. Stay safe. Here's a true story that happened to me when I was a kid. I've only told 2 people in my life. Not even my parents. I grew up very rural, in a trailer on a tobacco farm beside of a man-made lake. I always say man-made because I feel something happens when you disturb the land. Anyway, many things happened to me there, but this one I can't stop thinking and wondering about. I was about 7 to 8. I had moved my bed to be next to my door, away from the window where the scratching always came from. I was asleep with my head kind of hanging off the bed slightly upside down, so my head was kind of in the doorway to the hall, if that makes sense. At some point I opened my eyes, and there is a glowing green man thing, alien within inches of my face, and because I was sleeping crooked and upside down, my mouth had been open. He was holding his mouth in the shape that I was holding mine. He was copying me. That's when I realized we were both upside down. I was still laying with my head facing into the hallway, and he was in the hallway and had turned himself upside down so that we would be face to face. Literally. He didn't hurt me. I feel I scared him as much as he scared me because he left. I have no idea how he left because by then I was underneath my blanket. I've heard it said by someone whose whole lineage had stories of alien abduction that once it starts, it never ever stops. I didn't know if I was or ever have been abducted, but I still think of that green man and wonder if he still watches me. The quiet guy. Terrifying years ago, I used to do yard work for an aunt while I was pregnant and in between jobs. At the time, she was helping an older couple in their 50s out that was down on their luck, William and Jenny. They were staying in my aunt's house trying to get back on their feet, and William also did repairs around the house in exchange for their room there. One day, I was out in the yard, and I noticed William outside, staring at the road. He was a very quiet guy, kind but didn't have much to say usually. He looked very troubled for some reason, so I asked him if he was all right. Yes, well, I guess. He replied, I've always tried to be empathic to others, regardless of me knowing them very well. I told him if anything was bothering him, or if he just needed to talk about or vent, if it was something I could help with, I was happy to just listen. Well, he replied. He pulled a cigarette case out of his pocket, snapped his Zippo lighter open, and took a long drag of a cigarette. I didn't really notice he smoked before this day. He started telling me about where he and Jenny had been staying before they were living at my aunt's house. They had a very broken-down small RV that still could run, and they'd drive at different places and park for the night. One night, they parked on a dark and shabby part of town up in the city, about 30 minutes away from where my aunt's house was. It was a rundown area next to some old train tracks. It was after dark, not sure what time at night, but he did mention it was after dark and late. William told me the second they parked there, he just was hit with a horrible sense of anxiety, doom, fear. He couldn't describe it precisely. William was not a believer in the paranormal at this time, but he said he absolutely sensed something, and he said, it didn't feel like a human presence. It just felt like evil was sharing space with us. William and Jenny had a small dog. Jenny was going to just take the dog out to use the bathroom, and Jenny didn't seem to feel what William was initially feeling. Jenny got the dog and went outside. William was standing alone in the RV when the RV door swung right open on its own. He said he called for Jenny. She didn't answer. All of a sudden he felt an ice-cold chill. And he heard something, almost like heavy breathing and low-tone snarling. He just heard it, didn't see anything. Then all of a sudden, he could feel heavy footsteps running right towards him, and then he felt something go through him. He said his entire body went ice-cold, the smell of sulfur was in the air, and he felt paralyzed for a few moments. He fell and got back up and flew out of the RV. He couldn't find Jenny and was screaming for her. Then she suddenly appeared, seemingly out of breath. The dog had ran off as soon as she took him out. The dog was shaking and seemed to be terrified by something, and neither one of them ever saw the dog look that way. They got their things and immediately left that area. William told me that it felt demonic. Whatever that was wanted him and wanted to harm him. It took months to tell Jenny what happened in that RV while she was outside with the dog. William was shaking telling this story, the quiet guy that he was, and how scared he looked talking about it. I absolutely believe that all happened. He said occasionally after that he'd have flashbacks of that presence going through his body, and the ice-cold chill that enveloped his body, the feelings of pure fear and paralysis. Feeling whatever that was, wasn't human and wanted to harm him. Never, ever felt anything like that, he said under his breath. He lit another cigarette. This happened 10+ years ago. Sorry if some of this is hard to read. I'm definitely not a professional storyteller. But listening to him describe this has been something that's never left my mind, and I've always wondered what was really out there by those rundown train tracks. When I was younger, I lived in a small house. One afternoon, my sister and younger brother and I were home alone while our parents were at work, and my other siblings were not home yet. It was daytime, and I was hanging out in my sister's room. My sister was on the computer, and I was drawing. This is still when dial-up was a thing. Anyways, my brother was in the living room. I was getting a little hungry, so I decided to head to the kitchen for a snack. As I walked down the hallway and past my room, I suddenly froze. There, hanging from the ceiling fan in my room, was a figure with a noose around its neck. What the actual fuck? Its head bowed and shrouded in black. I was overwhelmed by an icy chill and could not physically move. I blinked so many times. I'm like, surely this is not real. I closed my eyes. I'm thinking what I'm seeing is fake. When I opened my eyes, the figure was still there, hanging. I turned my head to look away. When I looked back, it was finally gone. Still shaken, I didn't know what I just processed. I walked to the kitchen. I saw my brother in the living room thinking I should tell him, but he's younger. I didn't want to scare him. Confused and terrified, I kept the sight to myself, convincing myself it was just my imagination. That same night, I faced my fears and slept in my room. Our house is small and I shared a room with my other sister. I avoided sleeping near the ceiling fan. I slept closer to the wall. I practically hugged the wall and slept where I only faced the wall. I reassured myself that it was nothing and that I was safe. I finally drifted to sleep. The next morning, as I was groggily waking up, my mom barged into my room with a pair of scissors. Without saying much, she cut the rope I'd added to the ceiling fan's pull lever, which I had used because I was too short to reach it. That's where IT was hanging from. My parents' native tongue is Vietnamese. My mom simply said one word in Vietnamese: scary. Her reaction suggested she had seen something too. Context: I lived near a cemetery. I think this is the reason why it was there. This happened. We moved out of that house. For some odd reason, I thought about it again today. Now it's just a distant memory. This happened about 4 years ago when I was 17, living with my aunt. For some background, my aunt, my friend, and I are all spiritual, believe in ghosts, etc. So anyway, I can't recall why, but I was grounded, but my friend, let's call her C, around 6 p.m., wanted to come hang out. She came by and we practically begged my aunt to let me go to McDonald's with C to get a drink. After a lot of bribing with promises to clean the house, she said yes, but to be home in 15. So me and C hop in her car and go to McDonald's. But of course, being 17, we took a detour on the way home and stopped in a nature strip. Basically a dirt area behind some houses that led out to, well, nature. Anyways, we pulled up, opened our car doors and turned the car off to chill and talk. We start saying how we both felt weird, like there was a presence in the car with us, but kind of brushed it off. Well, at some point my car door slammed shut. And I mean slammed. Not like wind, but C laughed and thought it was me, until she looked at me, and I was still facing her with a shocked look on my face. C immediately shots herself and slams her door shut, turns the car on and books it out of there. While we're driving out of there, I said, it still felt like something was with us in the car, and immediately as I said that, I screamed and said I felt a cold hand on my thigh, and immediately as I said that, the light above us on the road went out, as did about 5 more perfectly timed as we drove under each. At this point, we're zooming home to tell my aunt. We get home and practically fall out of the car and run upstairs, but my aunt isn't home, and we're just sitting on the balcony collecting ourselves, but decided we'd go to my aunt's friend's house, whom I forgot to mention is also spiritual, we'll call her S. So we get back in the car and immediately we can feel that we're not alone again in the car, but decide to continue to S's house. We arrive and I knock on S's door and she immediately says, "What's wrong? You look like you've seen a ghost." And I awkwardly laugh and say, "Something like that," and asked if she's seen my aunt. She said she's gone home now, so I sigh and thank her and get back in the car. But now me and C look at each other and simultaneously say, "It feels like it's gone." We finally calm down and head back to my aunt's, and she basically laughed at us and told us not to be so scared. Beak they feed off of fear, saged us, and we went on about our night. Fast forward the next morning, I overhear my aunt on the phone to S&S says, "I think there's something in my house." So, sorry S, I may have dropped it off. So, this happened to me this year a few months ago, around June. So I was going to go to Deadwood, South Dakota by driving there from North Dakota. I was going to go with my grandma and grandpa on my dad's side, and my cousins and aunts on my dad's side as well. My mom didn't come with. So it was finally the day, and me and my mom drove to my grandma and grandpa's, and it was all normal. So later that day, I was in the back of my GPA's car, my GMA in the passenger seat, and I was in the back. Not really important right now, but my phone had been broken for a long time before this trip. Lines on my screen and colorful lines on my screen. Sometimes the screen would shut off and not turn on, and that would scare me a little, but it would only turn off like that later into the trip. Back to the story. So, I had a blanket in the back, a pillow, and another thing I can't remember. It was around an 8 to 10 hour drive, so I would sleep for at least 1/3 of the drive there, and I'll just skip to the part we arrive. So we arrived. I slept around 5 hours on the drive, and I got out of the car, which was in the garage. Keep in mind, this was a big, luxurious rental house you could stay in for maybe 1 to 2 weeks. I was only going to stay there for 1 week, though. Once I got out of the car, I was greeted with my older cousin. Let's just call her G. So me and G, we were really excited to see each other. We had only seen each other once before when I was really little. Anyways, a little later, and she was staying in a room with 2 beds. She had the bed closest to the window. I took the bed closest to the TV. After a while, it was nighttime, and we hung out in some other room and laid on the big bed in it. The people that last stayed there forgot to log out of Disney+, so we used that. She told me she was going to rewatch some JoJo's Bizarre Adventure, and I decided to watch it with her. Starting from the very start. That's the reason why I'm a big JoJo fan now. I've watched all the currently animated parts. Phantom Blood, Battle Tendency, Stardust Crusaders, Diamond is Unbreakable, Golden Wind, Stone Ocean. Anyways, that's not important. We watched up to the middle of Phantom Blood and I fell asleep. All was normal still. So maybe a couple days later, me, Grace, my other cousin, let's call her O, and some of my little cousins from Texas. G is also from Texas. There was a jacuzzi and a small sauna underneath the balcony. Keep in mind it was still around midday. So my cousins and me were crushing rocks, and I was sharpening a sharp stick on the concrete. They're kids, don't judge me, okay? And so I had thrown my stick somewhere, and I wandered away from my cousins. Keep in mind this rental house was maybe 100 feet away from the next several rental houses, and these were very close to the woods. Like, the actual woods. No sign of humanity 20 feet away from the balcony. I walked around the house and suddenly it got very quiet. I didn't even hear my cousins. They were fine. I was just on the opposite side of the house. So there I was, standing in between 2 rental houses, staring into the forest. I don't know what I felt at that moment. I felt like something was calling me to keep walking. It felt like something was out there in those woods. I took a step forward. It felt like it was just me and the agonizing silence and what was ever out there in those woods. I soon felt a very strong sense of dread and fear. I was frozen. It was the most surreal, tranquil yet terrifying experience of my life. It felt like time was slowed. It felt like me, and whatever was out there was the only thing there. I'm not talking about something like a spirit or a person. I'm talking about cryptid-type presence. It was like an animal, but it felt like whatever was out there was partly human. Safe to say I snapped out of it and slowly walked away from those woods. I didn't go back out that close to the woods the rest of my stay. Later that day, it was just me and G chilling in the jacuzzi. It was night. It was very dark. It was silent. Only the small sound of the buzzing of the jacuzzi. I stared out into the black void of the woods. It was pitch black. I think I was the only one who felt it, but that feeling of dread and fear slightly came back. I brushed it off, and the rest of the time we were out there it was just us and the darkness. I didn't talk about both of the times I felt that presence. That's the end of my story about my trip to the outskirts of Deadwood, South Dakota. I haven't told anyone about this experience. Only you, reading this, know this story. I haven't had an experience like that since then. Pretty sure I'm an empath, so I'm not sure who to tell about this, but I guess I can say it here. I had my first experience when I was around 13. I was at my grandfather's house. Keep in mind, he lived in the middle of nowhere. Like, closest neighbor was maybe 2 to 3 miles away. Anyways, while playing in the second living room and watching a movie, I pause it to go to the bathroom. I walk in the bathroom and have to shut both doors because it's a shared bathroom. I go to shut the first door, turn around, and the second door is already shut and locked. You can only lock it from inside the bathroom. I finish and walk out. My grandfather asks who followed me, and I say, nobody, why he saw someone follow me. My next experience happened a year later at my friend's house, about 2 weeks after her and her family got into a car accident. Her mom and stepdad decided to leave me and my friend with her little brothers and sisters alone for just a little bit, so they could have some time together. Honestly, friend and I didn't mind because we've done it before. We're doing dishes, and the window above the sink looks into the dining room, and then into another window that looks outside. We both saw a figure dressed in all white walk past the window twice. So we called her mom. She said they couldn't exactly come home at the moment and told us to call 911. We did, and later found out there were remains a few miles away from her house. My last 3 experiences have been about family members. I had just graduated high schools and was in lifeguard training. Second day of training, I go into a panic attack. No clue why. So the head guy tells me to come back for the 3rd day. I walk to my car, getting ready to head back to my in-law family's house, since it was a 2-hour drive to where I live and just right down the road from their house. But I start my car and see I missed a call from my great-grandmother. I go to call her back. She answers and says, "I love you, I'll see you soon," and hangs up. I decided to just get back home. Almost like something told me to go. I get home and see my dad. He tells me he has to tell me something. I sit on the couch, look at him and say, "She died, didn't she?" And she did, actually, an hour before she called me. The second one was my uncle. I had a dream about him. Don't really remember what happened in the dream, but woke up the next morning and found out he had passed away. My recently was my grandfather. I was pregnant at the time and called him to ask if I could come visit when I get off from work the following day. He said yes, and to stop by and get his favorite dinner on my way over. I go to sleep and couldn't fall asleep. Once again, something in the back of my mind saying something is wrong. I get a phone call from my mom saying she's in my driveway and needs to talk to me at this time. It's around 5:30 to 6 a.m. I'd called my grandfather around 6:30 to 7 p.m. the previous night. She told me my grandfather had passed away and that her and my dad found him because he wasn't answering his phone. Later, when we got the coroner's report, it said he shot himself. I guess I just want to know if anyone else gets feelings like this or if I'm the only one. So, this happened around 3 years ago when I was still in college. It was late night, and I was studying in my room with my laptop facing me. From where I was seated, I was getting a clear view of the drawing room. It wasn't all dark, but dimly lit. As I was concentrating on the screen, I suddenly felt that I being watched. I looked up, and I couldn't believe what I saw. A figure all black with no face and nothing, just a huge blob of darkness, was standing in the drawing room near the curtains and was looking right at me. It didn't move when I saw it, and nor could I. There was this brief moment where we just looked at each other, and suddenly it vanished. I was still in shock and couldn't move myself in that minute. I know what I saw, and IT knows as well. I knew I had to just stand up and go check my house, and that's what I did. I grabbed my phone, turned on the flashlight, and ran to my drawing room. There was nothing. Nothing. I went to my mother's room and she was sleeping. I didn't want to wake her up, so I checked rest of the house to found nothing, and then came back to my room, back again in front of my lap, top. The whole night I was in utter shock, but what was interesting is that I didn't actually feel like it threatened me. It made me curious and scared. At that time, my father was living separately, as he was posted in another state due to his job. When months later he visited us, he told us that he saw a shadowy figure in his house as well. And I asked him on which date and month, and this was coincidentally around the same time period when I had my encounter. I wondered for a long time if this was just a dead relative visiting us or some real creepy shit. But after this, I had a few more tiny incidents in that house which sort of made me immune to being super scared. Hope you enjoy this true scary stories. Don't forget to subscribe to my channel and click on the notification button for new video. See you next time.